Du hast nicht die leiseste Ahnung.
Every split second counts.
Silver Arrow, the legendary Formula One car.
The Circuit, tonight on CNN, in association with DHL.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Breaking news, an attempted coup in Turkey, the military claiming it has seized power from Turkey's president and imposed martial law. But the president says the coup has failed. It is unclear who actually is in control of the country at this hour. This is CNN Tonight. I'm Don Lemon. Overnight, tanks rolling through Istanbul, thousands of people taking to the streets amid explosions and gunfire. Turkey's president speaking to the nation, calling the coup attempt treason. I want to begin with Andrew Finkel. Andrew is a freelance journalist who is in Istanbul. He joins us now by phone with the very latest information. Andrew, you are there. What is happening now that the sun has come up?
Well, yes, it's first light after a really extraordinary night in Turkey. It appears that the coup attempt has failed. The evening began with soldiers on the streets of major Turkish cities, of tanks on the bridges, on low-flying jets over the capital, of the parliament being bombed. But the government issued a counter-appeal. Mr. Erdogan, the Turkish president, whom we're used to seeing surrounded in all sorts of regalia, this time appeared on television with someone holding up an iPhone and FaceTime, and he basically called for people to take to the streets, to take to the airports, to not to let the coup makers have their own way. And that appeal appears to have been successful. People were out on the streets. The military did not, the coup makers did not fire on their own people. Now it appears that the situation is, if not entirely under control, sort of under control.
We had the deputy prime minister on who said that they had deployed aircraft to take out some of the rogue aircraft over Ankara that had been firing on the parliament. Until we get word on that, we will continue to go on the assumption that it is not in control until we find out if they, as a matter of fact, have been able to contain or shoot down that rogue aircraft. Andrew, I need to tell you that we're looking at live pictures coming in now. This is from Istanbul. You can see that there is traffic backed up there. Moments ago, we had someone on who said that they heard an explosion, and people are still out in the streets. Some people sitting down in the middle of the interstate. Are you concerned about what happens next as the sun continues to rise there?
Well, yes, I think we're all concerned not just about today, but about the weeks ahead. This has clearly been a very damaging scar in Turkish society. The people who you're describing are people who went to the airport to greet Mr. Erdogan, to encourage him, and now they're trying to make their way home. The skies have been reverberating with the sound of low-flying jets, sonic booms shaking the buildings, what may be jet noises, which may be explosions being heard off in the distance. It's a very disconcerting atmosphere here. But yes, we are concerned that how is the government is clearly going to, assuming it manages to regain power successfully, is clearly going to carry out a purge of its opponents, and how widely it will cast its net, we have to wait to see.
Andrew Finkel, we appreciate you giving us your expertise and your eyewitness knowledge as well. Andrew Finkel is a freelance journalist in Istanbul, and he's been joining us here all evening on CNN. Andrew, thank you. I want to bring in now CNN correspondent Jim Sciutto and Ivan Watson. They're both there as well. Ivan is our senior international correspondent, and Jim is our chief national security correspondent. Both of them have a wealth of knowledge on this particular situations or situations like this. Jim, to you first. What does the U.S. government think the current situation is in Turkey this morning?
Let me tell you, Don, U.S. officials have been very cautious throughout. Early on, they were cautious to identify this as a coup. In fact, they used the term uprising, and then they took some time, 3-4 hours into it, before making a more public statement when you had both the president and Secretary of State John Kerry issuing unequivocal backing for the democratically elected government of Turkey, in effect opposing the coup and saying people should support their democratically elected leaders. Since then, they are now equally cautious pronouncing this over or making any sort of assessment as to whether the threat is done. They have been watching this closely. They've been getting incomplete information, just as we've been getting incomplete information. And this even while, I'm told, they've stayed in contact as best they can with their Turkish counterparts, both in the military and at the political level. But I think the U.S. confusion in terms of assessing it probably shared somewhat by their Turkish counterparts as they were trying to judge what was happening where and when. So at this point, just as although you're hearing Turkish officials at this point pronouncing it over, U.S. officials are not expressing that with any sort of certainty.
Jim, we understand, President Erdogan has addressed the nation twice tonight, once on social media, once on television. Talk to us about what he said.
Well, first, and you make a great point, because that first time he addressed the nation, it was by cell phone. I mean, it was a Turkish broadcaster, exactly, holding up a cell phone and the president FaceTiming his first address to the nation. The first time he was seen since the coup started was on that tiny little screen there. Later, he managed to get himself to Istanbul. At this time, he was on vacation on the Turkish coast. He got himself to Istanbul and gave a more formal press conference, showing himself physically, not in the Turkish capital, but in its largest city there, and with very strong words. You heard him saying the coup is over, and that those who turned their guns on the people of Turkey, on the state of Turkey, will be punished very harshly. This is a man trying to express and show control at this point. And keep in mind, Don, leading up to this, he has, as much as the coup is an assault on the Turkish democracy, keep in mind this is a leader who's been accused of very undemocratic moves in his country, imprisoning journalists, closing down media operations, restricting access to social media, and going after the judiciary and removing officials that he saw that were not faithful to him. So that narrative continues, and assuming this coup is over and his side has been victorious, of course, people in Turkey are going to be bracing themselves, perhaps, for an even more aggressive leadership from Erdogan.
All right. To Ivan Watson now. Ivan, rebel soldiers entered CNN Turk studio, CNN sister network, and we watched live earlier as the anchor desk went empty. What's your reaction to this? Was it too late if they really wanted a successful attempt?
Well, this was an incredible scene where the editor-in-chief says that these coup soldiers landed with a helicopter and then basically forced journalists from our sister network off the air at gunpoint. And then we saw these very surreal images of the studio being emptied and a live broadcast continuing for the better part of an hour afterwards with just an empty studio until eventually the CNN Turk broadcasters came back in again and started broadcasting again. A moment of bravery for the Turkish media, which, by all accounts, has been under immense pressure from the government of Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who has jailed many journalists, who has actually shut down other TV stations in the past. There have been a couple other remarkable moments on television here where the anchor woman of the state TRT television network was forced to read, she says, a coup statement on the air at the beginning of this turbulent chain of events. And then several hours later, she explained that she'd been forced at gunpoint by soldiers to do this and then rescinded those claims. So the media has played a really remarkable role in this. Another point to bring out, there's been a lot of criticism of Recep Tayyip Erdogan that he's trying to dominate Turkey, turning it into one-man rule. Remarkably, in this time of deadly violence, you've seen leaders of opposition parties that are in the parliament who are very critical of Recep Tayyip Erdogan coming out and condemning the attempted coup and essentially defending the elected government. Between them and other members of civil society and the media, that might be a source of pride for Turks during what has been a very disturbing and frightening and deadly night, Don.
So, Ivan, you know, the attack on the Ataturk airport was on June 28th. We were here live talking about it not long ago, and now this. What does this mean for the region and specifically for the fight against terror?
I think it's another very frightening factor. I mean, before this happened, Turkey, which is at this pivotal geostrategic location, it's next to Iraq, it's next to Syria, it's next to Europe. There are oil and energy pipelines going through it. It's a major transit route as well for everything from refugees and migrants. Turkey was already facing immense challenges, Dawn. It was fighting both ISIS, which had bombed Istanbul alone at least 3 times this year. Most recently, just about under 3 weeks ago, a triple suicide bombing at Istanbul airport. It's also fighting Kurdish separatists, PKK fighters, struggling to deal with huge refugee population from Syria, with militants that have established networks in Turkey as well. And now you have a major and deadly power struggle taking place between elements of the military and the elected government. The police forced to try to keep some sense of law and order without knowing who to really follow at this point. In the midst of this, we saw scenes of absolute chaos at Istanbul's international airport, which was just bombed a little less than 3 weeks ago. Right. The military briefly appeared to try to take control of it, and then crowds of Erdogan supporters swept in past the metal detectors and just marched around an airport that had just been bombed a little bit less than 3 weeks ago. So just imagine what is going on elsewhere in the country right now.
Yeah, one wonders what's going to happen next. Tim Sciutto, I have to ask you a question. This caught, obviously, the people who, you know, had knowledge of the Erdogan government and Turkey, caught them off guard. What about the White House here in the United States? Catching them off guard, how has their response been?
I think it's fair to say they were caught off guard. There was no warning on this end. Of course, they've been aware of internal opposition to Erdogan in Turkey. They also have known and seen his own public expressions about this danger. There was a case earlier this year when I believe Erdogan was meant to go to Muhammad Ali's memorial service and then flew back summarily to Turkey at the time, concerns about internal opposition. So there had been rumblings of this, but no one was expecting a full-on or partial military coup attempt tonight, and that partly explains why there was an enormous amount of, I don't want to say delay, but there was hesitation in saying anything in public about this until they had a clear impression of what was going on. It was about 3-4 hours into the coup before you had the president and John Kerry in lockstep declaring their support for the democratically elected government of Turkey. And I think you're going to have hesitation on this end now in the coming hours, however long it takes, to declare this over and perhaps to make a public statement about who the U.S. believes was actually behind this coup.
Tim Sciutto, Ivan Watson, thank you very much. Up next, more on our breaking news coverage of the coup attempt in Turkey.